I'm just getting ready here, letting a few people join nice and on time. It's a dismal rainy day here in Winterbourne, Articulate HQ, and it's raining outside, but nice and warm in here, and I think we can get going. So people are coming through the door. Very nice to see everybody. I will get started. Let's just close that. Okay. A little bit more window arranging before I get going, so I've got everything just in front of me, my speech notes and everything. Okay, so let's get going. Welcome, good morning. I am Matthew Stibber. I'm founder and CEO at Articulate Marketing. Today I'm trialing our new visual identity. We're putting the art into Articulate. By way of introduction for people joining and who don't know me, I run Articulate Marketing. We're a progressive marketing consultancy. We have helped more than 180 companies over more than 20 years build difference engines with branding, websites, content and automation. There we are, my lovely colleagues and I, up in London for our last company meeting. If what you hear today is interesting and you would like a free, no hard sell, no commitment conversation with me, you can book that articulatemarketing.com/meet. That's my online calendar. After this webinar is over, I'll be sharing these slides as a PDF and the recording, and you'll get an email probably tomorrow with all of that. And if you click on the link in the PDF, it'll also take you there. You can also email me, Matthew at Articulate Marketing, if you have any questions. I picked Banning Cock here from the Nachtwacht. I thought that was sort of appropriate because I think he's a wise fool or a foolish wise man. I don't know. Maybe that's my role in all of this. Certainly self-important. Here is the old church in Haarlem, where my family lived, and it's extraordinary. You can walk out of that picture into the square and it looks exactly the same today, except for the clothes. I've got a couple more webinars coming up before Christmas. There's a very specific HubSpot one about contact data enrichment, segmentation and targeting, which is something that every single one of our clients wants when they get into HubSpot. So I'm going to share some ideas and tips about that. And then a much more grandiose probably not the right word, grand webinar about thought leadership, to take a very broad view of what thought leadership is going to look like next year. So do sign up for that, articulatemarketing.com/webinars. There's no live chat on this meeting because I'm doing it on my own. I don't have producer support or anyone sort of answering questions, but please email me, Matthew at Articulate Marketing, if you have any questions. And I am doing this live. It's 10:03 on Wednesday morning. I've got builders in. There is a small risk of a power cut. So if I disappear temporarily, I think bear with me. I'll try and get back online as quickly as possible. Okay. Live theatre, everybody. All right, so what is brand voice and why does it matter? Let's start with a couple of slides to sort of locate ourselves, and then I'll talk a little bit about how you can create a great brand voice and deploy it and some of the pitfalls to avoid. So it's an old sort of Silicon Valley phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast, but voice is how that culture shows up on the page. So it's that role, and I think we see a lot of clients investing very heavily into a logo and into a brand identity, often into the design of a website, caring quite a lot about that, and very little attention is paid to the words, and yet the words are the important bit. And also, if you get the brand voice right, they're the biggest differentiator. So let's break this down. Brand voice. The voice is your brand personality and worldview, the kind of things that you want to talk about and the kind of approach or philosophy or stance or vibe that you take with it. And it's fairly constant. When you hear about tone of voice, often brand voice, tone of voice are almost synonymous. That's how it flexes for the context. So you might use a slightly different tone, but have the same voice for an email or an RFP or an error message on your app or whatever. But they should all be consistent and reflective of your brand's voice. So the tone flexes, but the voice is more constant. Brand voice is sort of half of copywriting. Okay, the people who don't do copywriting tend to think of copywriting as sort of bashing out some words or writing pretty. Wordsmithing is sometimes the phrase people use. And actually, a really good copywriter is thinking about how you say it and how you embody a brand voice. And for one brand, it will be different than from another brand. So brand voices obviously vary from company to company. How you say it is half of copywriting. What you say, the messaging, the proposition, the differentiation, and indeed the product or company information that you're actually trying to communicate, that's the other half. So it is a structured, well-planned and consistent use of language to convey brand emotions and to underscore meaning. Okay, to differentiate through words. It's also, I think, using brand voice is one of the main differences between writing and copywriting. Just because everyone knows how to write doesn't mean everyone is a writer. If you buy me a beer, I'll tell you the other differences between writing and copywriting. Okay, so why does it matter? Well, for us at Articulate, we have our roots in copywriting and branding. We've written for Microsoft and Google and very big companies, so we've sort of got that in our DNA. But in crowded and competitive markets, it's very hard to build a sustainable product differentiation. There are marginal differentiations in competitive markets, but it's hard to sustain them. And only one company in any given market can be the cheapest. So you need branding to differentiate yourself. And brand voice is perhaps the most powerful and sustainable way of building a connection with your potential customers and differentiating your business. A good copywriter can produce a lot more copy in a day than a good designer can produce logos. So when it comes to consistency, what we're trying to do with brand voice is to make sure that every bit of copy is consistent. We think of, we use the Lego analogy, where whatever brick you've got connects with every other Lego brick. I used to design computer games for Lego, so I often go to Lego as a sort of role model. There's commercial reasons too. Companies with consistent branding see higher revenue, as you can see here from this stat. And Edelman's B2B Thought Leadership Impact Report says that 70% of decision makers say they are more likely to think positively of a company that produces high quality thought leadership. And producing content that has a consistent brand can really, really build trust, right? Can relate to people. It can help build trust and engagement and build a relationship with people by talking to people in their language about their issues rather than your stuff and your issues, and so on. Okay, I make one last point on this. We are now living in, I won't say a world of peak content. There may well be even more tidal waves of AI slop, and when I started doing content marketing, inbound marketing, 15, 20 years ago, the idea of doing a blog was like really radical. Yeah, we're going to do a blog. Everyone was very excited about that. Now everybody's got a blog. My dog has a blog. So it's also a method of differentiating yourself and humanizing what you're doing and what you're saying in a way that, Me Too, blah, blah, crappy, cheap copywriting can't do. An AI slop, which is, AI is getting better and better every year, but it still produces pretty generic round pebble stuff. So it's a way of differentiating against all of that noise in the background. I told you this was live. My dehumidifier's come on and it's annoying me, so I'm just going to turn that off. Right. Well, not quite the Blue Peter elephant, but there you are. Okay. So, how to find your brand's true voice and not kind of kid yourself that you've done tone of voice, but really it's just whatever people write. So this diagram is how you do it, but it's not intended as something you can take away. This is how we do it, right? So we have a series of steps going through to build a brand, integrated with logo design and positioning and messaging as well, and not just brand voice. But there's desk research, there's interviews, there's workshops, there's customer and company surveys. There's quite a process to doing it thoroughly and diligently. And I'm showing this not to say you have to go through every single one of these steps to make an improvement or to get there, although, if you want to go do this with us, we would really love to talk. It's more to say you kind of got to do the work, you've got to think about it, you've got to take a bit of a structured approach to it, you've got to invest in it on whatever scale you're doing. It isn't just a couple of pages at the back of the brand guide that your designers came up with. It is an exercise. So as an old soldier in the trenches of copywriting, I would say that absolutely every single brand voice project has to start by hammering home the need for readability. So you need shorter sentences, shorter words, avoid the passive voice, avoid hype and BS, sort of hyperbole, this sort of promotional language, use strong verbs, be concise and scannable. This is as true today as it has been for the last 20, 50 years. And there is fundamental research by the Norman Nielsen Group that says that when you write for a website, but this is true in offline as well, in a way that is concise, scannable and objective, i.e. factual, not promotional, it dramatically increases what they call usability. They're usability consultants, but what they mean by usability for copy is recall, credibility, trust. So things that really, really matter to a brand and things that really, really matter to any business. You want to be remembered, you want to be trusted, you want people to read more of the stuff on the page. You don't want to lose them, you don't want to waste their time or turn them off. So this has to be fundamental, but it's these things are true across any brand. I mean, how hard you want to push the concision, whether you want to be really, really short and punchy is a brand choice. But do it. Most B2B tech companies, I would say 70-80%, are far too verbose and they talk far too much about their stuff in their language, with wordy, waffly, hyped copy. And you'll notice this if anyone's using the word solutions. That's a clue. Okay, so short, concise, readable. The next thing, in my opinion, is you start with an attitude. You identify what attitude you have as a business in respect to your customers, your content, your thoughts. And this typically emerges out of the personality of the sort of core founders or the company's personality. But it can be something you can influence and shape. And it shouldn't necessarily be the default voice of your founder, all right? Much as my colleagues might accuse me of doing that. So we did an exercise for a client that was a small business that competed with Accenture, Deloitte, and PwC. Smaller, they're still quite big, but smaller than these big giant multinational consultancy firms. And one of the things they wanted to do was, we want to be more like these big consultancies because we come up against them in RFPs and we want to look as credible as they do. What do they do that we're not doing? So we did a very deep dive strategy exercise, looking at a whole bunch of things, how they do their websites and so on. But part of it was their verbal branding. We looked at these three companies. And it's really clear when you look at PwC, Accenture, and Deloitte that they have an attitude. And you can read now. I mean, because my colleague Madeline Saunders did this, but I've gone through the exercise with her in the presentations, and I could look at a piece of copy from one of these things, and I'd have a pretty good idea which of these three companies wrote it based on the attitude underneath. Typically, 1, 2, 3 words is enough. You don't need a big sort of verbose, everyone's happy with it document that describes this, but an attitude is a great place to start. In my opinion, however, professional is not an attitude or a tone of voice. If somebody says, oh, we want to sound professional, I think that's at best sort of stating the bleeding obvious and table stakes. At the worst, it's sort of lazy cop out. What does actually professional sound like? So I would say if you hear the word professional coming up as a descriptor of what attitude you want, dig in, dig harder, dig deeper, because there's something behind that that is probably interesting, and professional is not interesting. If you want to experiment or think about what a difference of attitude looks like in copy, go out to a newsagent and buy a copy of the FT, Financial Times, The Guardian, The Economist, and The Telegraph, and see if you can detect a difference in attitude between those high quality professional things. Now, you don't want to necessarily be like a newspaper, but they all have a different sort of, you can detect a attitude towards the world and attitude towards the reader. Okay. Next thing that I think is really valuable is get out there in the company and start taking the temperature of what people think the company brand voice is and perhaps could be. There's sometimes a difference. Sometimes you need to move a little bit. We have this exercise. I've just put a few of these word pairings up here, where we will take a group of people in a workshop through, well, where do you think is articulate marketing serious or whimsical? Is it professional or friendly? And sometimes they're quite close, and sometimes, you'd quite like to be both of those things. You'd like to be professional and friendly. What you're trying to do here is get people to come down on one side, and the debate and the discussion and the differences and the gestalt of this conversation, that's how you discover the tone of voice. There isn't actually, the end result of this isn't actually, the words you choose are just a tool to get to the understanding. It's a bit like one of these sort of psychological tests that tells you what kind of personality you are by asking you a series of challenging choices where you might choose one or the other. You might be leaning one way or another. There's a lot more of these, but these are some useful ones that you can start with. So provoke the debate. I'll give you one little insight into this. Historically, articulate for several years was, I would describe our tone of voice as whimsical. There's a homepage, top of the homepage used to say anything is possible except love and time machines, which is a nice line, but as a sort of positioning statement for a marketing consultancy, it wasn't right, and as we are now, and we've moved on quite a lot from that, but that was definitely, that vibe was whimsical, and a lot of people really liked it. It reflected a lot that was true about our attitude and our approach and our people. We are now, I would say, moving very much towards serious. So this is an interesting thing, that these can evolve gradually over time, and you might want to set some aspirational goals. And if you were wondering about the difference between righteous and just, Superman is righteous, but Batman is just. Okay, just sharing that thought with you. I absolutely love this, why personas can be stupid and trivial. Because, and I know this was published before Ozzy Osbourne died, so with respect to the late Ozzy Osbourne, they're both the same, but they're very clearly different personas, right? So you get too much into demographics in your personas, and you don't dig deeper. You can end up being actually quite untargeted with your personas, and the trick with personas is to find the details and the differences that you can engage with your tone of voice. So surveys and interviews are really important. Interviews particularly, in fact. I've run over the last year or so podcast interviews for a couple of our clients, the wonderful Black Dot Solutions and the wonderful CloverDX.com, and talking to customers and people like their customers has been incredibly helpful in understanding kind of who they're selling to and what's going to tickle their fancy. We also quite like Spark Toro, and some desk research is quite helpful to understand what else people that you want to talk to are reading, looking at what kind of articles they're interested in, what they engage in, what their social media profiles look like. This sort of stuff is much more interesting than biographical details for personas. Okay, I think with brand voice, it's actually quite interesting to pick an enemy. It's quite interesting to take sides. It's an old saying, but all marketing is targeting. If you don't have Pepsi's or Coca-Cola's advertising budget, you can't target everyone on the planet. You have to pick, you have to choose. And good marketing is positioning. So, why are we better, different, interesting? And I picked these three examples of companies, quite substantial companies, well-known businesses, and they're in the consumer realm, but they've very clearly taken a stance. They've picked an enemy and they've kind of gone after them. And the verbal branding of these three adverts, and indeed the whole sort of stance of the company in words, reflects that positioning, that differentiation. So they're going from who they are and what their business aspires to be and how they compete and go to market, and they reflect that in their brand voice by going, we're not like them, we're better than them. And it's, I think, all three good examples. So if you can find a suitable enemy and pick them, that's fantastic, right? Okay, so let's talk about common pitfalls, things that go wrong with brand voice. And I've got a few slides, on sort of 4 or 5 slides, so crikey, I better pick the pace up because it's another 10 minutes. Okay, so always be benefiting. Always think about the reader, the recipient, the customer, the potential customer. It's much more interesting to talk about what you can do for them, how you can help them, what the benefits are for them. But it's very tempting and easy to fall back into the gravitational pull of talking about yourself and your products and your services in your language. My former colleague Claire once said that the secret to selling technology is not to talk about technology. Right? Features don't sell, but solving problems or promising something better does. And I love this quote by Jason Fried from Basecamp. Here's what our product can do, and here's what you can do with our product. Sound very similar, but they are very, very different approaches, completely different approaches. And of course, Apple's Think Different campaign is a classic, perfect way of showing what the benefit is on a very broad, aspirational basis. They're talking about creativity, they're talking about impact, they're talking about transformation, they're talking about people who are iconic by Apple, and you can be like this. And IBM were, at the time of this coming, IBM and IBM compatibles were, talking about features, as we used to say at Hewlett Packard, feeds and speeds, not, Kermit the Frog or the Dalai Lama. So this is the and it's very hard. So really think about how to answer the so what and why does it matter and how does it help our customers. And sometimes the things that you want to say the most are actually the least interesting for the buyer. And that brings me on to this point, repeating that image. Sorry, I should have changed it on the other slide. The more you talk about yourself, the more boring you are. Marketing is fundamentally talking to potential customers about their issues in their language and how you solve them. And so getting that mindset of stop talking about yourself and how do we turn this, that I think is really important. And a really common failure mode is to structure your personas, your tone of voice, your messaging, your positioning around this is who we are, this is what we do, this is why we're good. And it's a particularly strong temptation in technology businesses, especially smaller ones, where the founders and the owners and the sort of kind of founding principle of the business is all around technological differentiation. And I would really like to talk about that in the phrase that we've coined at Articulate, the man in the mirror problem. Your goal is not to please your internal stakeholders. Your goal is to get them to understand brand voice is about talking to those people out there, right? And they are not necessarily like you. Brilliant founder of the business who loves technology, or brilliant founder of the business who is an expert salesperson who can, sell anything to anybody. It's about engaging people and talking to people. They are not necessarily interested in the same things you are. They probably aren't spending anything like as much time thinking about technical features and things that you spend a lot of time thinking about. And they don't buy the products and services you make for the same reasons that you created them. And you don't need to be an expert to consume your product, although you do need to be an expert to consume it. So all of this is pointing to an interesting quote that I'll share with you. So Suzuki Roshi was the founder of the San Francisco Zen Center, and he said, in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, and in the expert's mind there are few. And what he was talking about was sort of the more you study and the more you learn about Buddhism, the sort of narrower your sort of field of opportunity gets, and that in various interesting ways runs counter to the idea of Zen. I'm not talking about Buddhism, but it is really interesting because the people we deal with quite often are experts in their field, in their company, in their business, and we respect that, and their expertise is critical, and we have to find a way of bridging between that expertise where there are few possibilities, and everybody wants to talk about PhD level technology to other people who are technologists, and bridge that to people who are busy business decision makers or technology decision makers who are considering a number of different options to solve a problem they've got with limited time to think about it, probably aren't going to be motivated by the details in the same way that you are. So avoiding that man in the mirror fallacy, and part of our job when we work with people is to take companies on a journey to understand that they need to stop looking in the mirror, and they need to look out a little bit. Okay, couple of quick slides and then we'll bring this to an end. So the next danger to avoid is beware of the smooth pebble. It's very easy to try and avoid being offensive to anybody, avoid taking bold statements, avoid pushing the boundaries a bit. It's safer and it's probably politically easier to be, let's be professional, let's not say anything controversial, and let's just be nice and narrow in our brand voice. In the same way, just separately, with differentiation and positioning, go to market, let's not rule any potential customers out, whereas in fact the more targeted and specific you are, generally the better that works, and you rarely lose customers along that journey. Anyway, so we have, there's a saying in design, this Mayer, most advanced yet acceptable. The job of a branding consultancy like Articulate is to push people out of their comfort zones, out of this smooth pebble, really give them options that show what it would be like if they were, significantly differentiated. Their brand voice was very out there pushing, and accept that there's going to be some rubber band elasticity back to what might be acceptable. But if you just start with what might be acceptable, you still get that rubber band tendency, but you end up being very safe and very undifferentiated. For example, in Articulate, our brand attitude for our brand voice is reassuringly human, ruthlessly efficient. Ruthlessly efficient got quite a lot of pushback, and indeed, there was a lot of debate about that. Setting aside the nod to Monty Python, but it's an aspirational pushing of a boundary for us, and we really want to be the company that is that and communicates that, so that we're efficient and good with our work, efficient and good with our account management and so on, and so. And that's built on our three pillars. I won't get into that too much, but I'll happily talk to you if you want to ask questions about how we got there and the journey we went through. And the other challenge with this is to be very conscious of the hippo, highest paid person's opinion, right? The boss's words weigh 10 tons, and I struggle with this like every boss, I'm sure. It is important to understand where they're coming from. Their voice is important, but it shouldn't be the default, or people shouldn't kowtow to it automatically. And again, part of our job as an external consultancy is to push people beyond that. All right, So this document, this page has some template things that you might want to put in a brand voice. Even a minimum viable brand voice of 2 or 3 pages is better than no brand voice documentation at all. But if it's just, it's page 28 of the visual logo brand identity with a couple of clever words that some designers have come up with, that's not enough. And if your brand voice only lives in the CMO's head, you don't have a brand voice. Actually, you've got a risk. So documenting it is really important. For us, we've got at Articulate brand voice guidelines, and we've got a 20-30,000 word writer's handbook that we've developed internally to really make sure that we're writing well, not only for ourselves but for clients. Come back and look at this in the PDF and use this as a potential template. One last point about this before I wrap up, and thank you for your patience. We are now experimenting on a beta basis with taking the brand voice and the personas and the ICP work that we do and embedding it into a custom GPT so that we can then give that to our clients and say, look, alongside the usual activation, training, deployment, documentation, because you need all that as well. But you can give this to your team and you can actually run copy through it, and it will do, it's a good use of AI of just getting that sort of sense check of, well, here's a way you could rewrite this that would better reflect the brand voice, or here's a tip on it, especially if you've got lots of before and after examples. So while this is still in beta test and work in progress, we think this is a really exciting way of using AI in a human first sort of manner. All right, so a couple of final next steps. Again, please do book up a call with me. Whether you're watching this live, thank you for sticking with me, or you're watching the recording, I'd love to speak to you. That brings me to an end, and only 2 minutes overrun, so well done. Naturally loquacious and verbose, maximum verbosity engaged, managed to finish more or less on time. So thank you very much for joining today. That brings us